Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our Big Room Planning webinar. My name is Jenny Slade, and I'm on the marketing team here at Rally. And now I'd like to turn things over to Andy. Andy Carlson is a solutions architect. He's a product expert here at Rally. He's got more than 15 years of experience working with Agile teams. And he helps our customers figure out which of Rally's Agile solutions are the best fit for them. He's got a specialty in companies that need to scale Agile. In a former life, Andy was a coach, which makes him super passionate about helping organizations build happy and successful teams. Andy's also a musician in his spare time, so he understands what it takes to orchestrate a bunch of people to make beautiful music together. Andy.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Jenny. Andy Carlson here. And we'll be talking about big room planning today, but before we get into the nuts and bolts of big room planning, I want you to look at this list and this question in particular, and think about your organization, okay? Or maybe a piece of the organization that you work in or have influence over. And I want you to think about waste. So, when we look at this list of 7 things, dependencies that block, right? Those are those forces beyond your control, wagging your work. Risks that explode, whether they're internal or external, visible or not. Things you didn't account for when you're trying to execute a plan. Unrealistic plans, that roadmap that maybe felt really good on paper but never had a chance of surviving in the real world. Or unstaffed priorities. Right? Those are the things we want to do, but, don't have the capacity to take on. We've also got problems with frequent pivots. So you keep changing your mind, or the market changes their mind, or the stakeholder changes their mind, which changes the direction of the work. Lack of commitment. So this is a big one, right? Do your engineers, do your development staff, do they feel like they can accomplish what they're setting forward in the plan? Now, if you can't get those 6 things in line, then there's no chance of you delivering on time. So think about this. Think about what percentage of your budget, your run rate of your organization is lost to these wastes. Okay? I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, but there's other problems at play too. If we didn't have those wastes, right, we know from reports like this, industry reports like this is the Standish report, that 64% of the features we do build are rarely or never used. And for those of you that don't know, Rally Software, our company, was acquired by CA Technologies in July, which has been interesting. I'm now interacting with other parts of the CA organization and learning more about our portfolio of tools out there. And one of the things that I found particularly interesting while attending a sales call with a mutual customer was that we had someone that was presenting about this tool called Test Data Manager. And this is also a new tool for CA. What it does is it creates synthetic test data so that you can get the maximum code coverage for your tests. And when they go into new customers or prospects, they typically do an analysis on the existing test data. And what's interesting about the existing test data at most companies is that testers take the data from production, right? And when they complete that analysis of how much of the code base is touched based off production data, that number is around 20%. That means 80% of the stuff you're building isn't even touched by people in production, isn't even touched by your customers. So it's worse than this. So, they said that's the average, but there are people with as high as 40% test coverage. So that's just interesting, right? We've got all this waste, and then we're spending all this time not building the right things. Additionally, you've got this other problem, right, where you may have folks up at the top setting context, trying to set a vision for the company, and underneath, you've got folks that are trying to execute on that vision, and we're disconnected. They may not even know what that vision is, or maybe not get to check in on a regular basis. So it doesn't matter how good that strategy is if we can't deliver on it. Okay, enough with the doom and gloom. So let's agree that we're all trying to do more with less, or at least get more out of what we have. Unfortunately, when we're in that situation, a lot of times it's the development organization gets the finger pointed at them. They're the ones that, hey, they're not doing fast enough, their work isn't good, we're not, and that's not true. This is a bigger problem. It's an organizational problem. It's a system problem. So let's talk about a couple things that I think need to change and align throughout that system. The first is this old school methodology of thinking about managing resources, managing people, and putting them onto projects doesn't work. We know this. We look to industry analysts like Gardner that are saying PPM and project management is changing. We need to stop thinking like this. Individuals don't deliver value. Instead, it's a team that delivers value. And in this world, it's the Agile team, right? The persistent Agile team, the strong Agile team. And instead of putting teams or people on projects, we need to think about how we let those teams be this autonomous delivery engine and we flow work through those teams. So that's a mind shift change we need to think about from an organizational perspective, not putting people on the work. The other thing is we want to think about is, okay, well, a single team isn't probably going to solve the most complex problems. So how do we structure those teams so that we can maximize the feedback loops and take advantage of all that incremental output each team does and synchronize the delivery and the integration of all that work. So you want to think about the cadence and the structure of your organization. When we move towards a scaled process, there's, we want to align the cadence, the planning cadence of these teams, and we want to introduce opportunities for integration and steering from an organization. So you want to think about how those teams are. In this case, we're looking at Scrum teams, right, that are sprinting in 2 weeks, and we've stacked them on top of each other. And look how they all nicely fit into this package. That's great. So that's what's going to help maximize those feedback loops. So you want to think about those concepts as we talk today. And if we can agree that the team is the resource unit, I'm going to share with you this metaphor. The metaphor is that your capacity is fixed, and it's like a bucket, okay? And those 7 things that we were talking about before, those are the wastes. Those are the holes in your bucket. So we want to fill this bucket with as much value as possible. We can't squeeze any more blood from a stone. We can only get so much done in a given set of time with a given set of people. So how do we amplify that, right? How do we get more value? Well, some organizations think they're going to make the bucket bigger, right? But when you make the bucket bigger, the holes, those wastes, get proportionally larger, right? So we're wasting even more. So what's our solution there? Our solution could be to patch the holes. Maybe you put Band-Aids on it first, maybe you solder it later, right? But we need to stop the waste. We need to think about how to stop the waste. The other thing we want to do is we want to put the right things in the bucket. And I like this also, this double metaphor for you, right? We want to put the big things in, the things that matter, the rocks. That's from the Rockefeller Habits, right? And then we'll sprinkle the sand in afterwards. So we kind of went from water to stone, but that's okay. This is just a metaphor. But the idea is, what do we do first, right? We've got, this waste we need to fix. We need to figure out how to get the right things in there. Well, our recommendation is to do both at the same time. And that's what we're here to talk about. That's what we feel. We're going to give you the starting point to solving all these problems. Maybe not all at once, but figuring out which ones are the most important ones for your organization. So let me share this with you too. Every single organization I talk to, prospects, customers, they all have this thing in common. They're trying to deliver more value to market faster. Okay? And when you do that, you want to think about your value stream, what it takes to get an idea, be it big or small, out to market as fast as possible. So one way you can measure this going forward is you think about cycle time, or the shortest sustainable lead time. But I can tell you that a lot of organizations don't organize around these principles, right? When you think about a value stream, it's much more than just your R&D or your development organization, your engineers. Those are the people down at the bottom of this U-shaped horseshoe curve. And unfortunately, that's where we hyper-focus a lot. Instead, we want to identify, who are the folks that set that strategy, that identify these things we could potentially do, potentially build, these problems we could solve. And how do we fund that and break it down into small enough chunks so that the teams can consume it? And then once the teams do the building, are we coordinated with the downstream processes? Do we have rock-solid DevOps infrastructure to deploy this stuff? Or do we need to incorporate people to do that manually? So you start to identify all these bottlenecks and all these opportunities for us to improve this value stream. But to get there, you need to identify what that value stream is. And when folks think about, amplifying the benefits of Agile, we've seen a lot of organizations move towards this model. This is a scaled Agile framework. Now, this isn't a presentation on the scaled Agile framework. If anything, I'm oversimplifying this, but it's a great vision to look at maybe the portfolio level, the team level, and how those two things connect at the program level. But what we're seeing organizations really move the needle and really gravitate towards that scaled Agile framework that Dean Leffingwell and his company have created is all around this release planning event. When you go to the SAFe Scaled Agile Framework training certification classes, they teach you how to facilitate a release planning event. They teach you why it's important. And this release planning is not planning of releasing code. It's a cadenced, long-range plan for multiple Agile teams, where we take stuff coming from the business and we break it into the right size granularity for multiple teams to then consume it and plan out what the next quarter could potentially look like. And this isn't very different than what we've been saying in the Agile space for a long time. This is the 5 levels of Agile planning, and almost all organizations have some type of long-range planning, and whether it's annual planning, whether it's a lofty vision, a detailed roadmap, but some way to communicate, hey, I think this is what we should be doing. And then those organizations that are Agile or trying to become Agile, they spend time at the team level doing their daily stand-ups, doing sprint planning every 2 weeks. But you'll notice this little kind of mid-range thing in the middle is called release planning in the Agile circle. I don't care what you call it. This is what connects those two hemispheres. And we feel that it's core to scaling Agile practices. This is the tip of the spear. This is actually where you should start solving some of those organizational problems. Okay? But it's probably not what you think it is. A lot of people think release planning is actually the act of planning releases, the planning projects out to production. But it's so much more than that in the Agile space. It's not a bunch of managers in a room dragging stuff into a tool and creating a plan. It's the act of planning. And it's the act of pulling all these people from the value stream into the room together when possible. Not to say you can't have some distributed aspects of it, but pulling everyone together, maybe once a quarter, to steer our activities towards delivering the most value. And when I show this picture to folks, sometimes they freak out. This is actually a huge version of release planning. It's an insurance company that we work with. You're probably like, wow, that looks expensive. And the truth is, there is cost associated with it. It is pulling a lot of people out of their work to do this. It's an investment. But we're urging you to make that investment. Because if we don't make that investment, I want to share with you what life is like without release planning, right? So, let's think about these 7 things. I asked you to think about this. It was the very first thing we talked about. I'm going to push a survey out right now, and I want you to think about that number. Think about the % of your budget that is lost to things like this. And take a minute or two to respond. So I've pushed the poll out. I have no awareness of how much delay is on it, so we'll give you some time here. Cue the Jeopardy music.
And you can't wait to see the answers when they come in.
So we've got almost half of the people have responded. Thank you.
Is this looking familiar? familiar to you, these numbers?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple more seconds here. If you're deliberating between one answer and the other, just pick one. This isn't a quiz. We're not going to hold you to it. We aren't collecting data on it. We won't tell your peers. Okay, well, thank you. We've got more than 2/3 of the people responding, 70% of the attendees. That's really great. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. Here's the answers, right? The answers from you guys. 36% of the audience said that 31 to 50% of their run rate is wasted of those 7 things. And that's pretty true to what we hear, when we talk to prospects, when we go out to conferences and talk about this. Here's the number that I picked. I said it was going to be between 40 and 60%. So we're in line with that. We're in line with what the market is telling us. 40 to 60%. How much money is that, right? We think about the run rate of your delivery group, your release train, your program, your product line, whatever, all those teams working, building stuff, right? I'm just going to model out a back-of-the-napkin calculation here. We've got 8 teams, assuming there's 8 people on a team, and then add 1 just so it's a nice round number there's a nice round number of 65 people. And let's just pretend that people are really cheap, and we know they're not. And that each one makes about $100K per year. That includes the cost of maintaining the employee benefits and all sorts of stuff to the organization, right? So that would make the run rate for this particular delivery group $1.6 million per quarter, or $6.5 million per year. Now, I just heard 30 to 50%, right? Scaled Agile Inc., Dean Leffenwell's company, who built that nice, pretty picture I was showing you before of the Scaled Agile framework, says the average run rate of the organizations he engages with, he calls them release trains, is about $2.2 million every year. Every 10 weeks, or $11 million a year. So it's actually quite a bit more than what we just estimated. But regardless, I mean, you can do your own calculation at a high level and factor in that, let's just say 40% waste is an incredible amount of money. When I talk to organizations that are investing in these big room planning ceremonies, they have shared with me that they estimate that this is about 2 to 4% of their run rate per meeting, right? And one of the ways one of our customers figures that out is they say, well, I pull everyone out of their work for a day and a half. So that's about 3% of our time. So it's 3%. It costs 3% of our run rate. And that's assuming that all the work that's done in this meeting isn't valuable, right? It's a waste of time. He's doing just an opportunity cost evaluation of this, But if we're solving real problems, solving those wastes, how can you say that it's a waste of time? So a modest investment for big returns. We've got, some of the solutions to big room planning here, some of the things it provides. When we talk about dependencies and risks, that was the first couple things on that other list. That's one of the outputs of this. You get a list of dependencies and risks. We visualize those. We deal with them. And then we also invite stakeholders and leadership in to set that context, to solve that problem, to connect the strategy and the execution, as well as have the teams get into some pretty detailed level planning so that we can make adjustments and learn about what we think is truly possible. We structure those communication plans so we can mitigate risks and dependencies throughout the iteration, and then throughout the quarter, and then we ask the team and everyone involved in the meeting to make a shared commitment to voice their concerns or their support. Truly believe that moving this approach is the fastest way to alignment. It's also the fastest way for any Agile transformation to take place. It's almost a middle-out approach. We're not trying to grassroots, scattershot Agile adoption. We're making the connection between the business and the development teams and the delivery stream, right? And we're taking a coordinated approach. All right. So if you're interested, you're still on the line here, we're going to talk about what this meeting looks like at a couple different levels of detail. And I'm a simple man, so I like 3 things, 3 inputs and 3 outputs, and then we'll kind of go through what the flow of the day looks like. But if you can remember these 3 inputs and 3 outputs, these will be the things you want to write down. So first of all, if we want to set context, one important input is to have that executive vision, not just the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do. We actually want that guy in the sport coat to show up. Maybe this guy that we don't see every day, right? And to explain to us what the company or the product line strategy is for the year at a more higher 10,000-foot view, and to connect it to the stuff we're about to plan, right? This is a step in the right direction to making good decentralized decision-making process stuff, right? So by empowering the teams with that vision, the teams can make better decisions at their level that align to that vision. And if that vision changes, it's an opportunity to check on it, right? The other thing is we want to have fully staffed teams. And what this is calling out is that we don't want to go into this meeting and try to sort out how we're organized. That would be incredibly wasteful, right? So there's some pre-work that goes into this, designing the system we're about to work through. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that later, but just know we don't want to show up and say, all right, who's my Scrum Master? How many do we have a product owner? Or maybe we're not Agile yet. So what does this look like for us? We want to tackle those problems in advance. Additionally, the third input is a prioritized backlog, meaning we're not going into this meeting to decide, what's the most important thing, right? Our stakeholders, our product managers, they've vetted a lot of this up front. They've sized things together with the team, with some information, some level of detail. You might not have stories all broken out by the time you get there, not that level of detail, but at least you'll have a good idea of a roadmap of things you're trying to accomplish within the time window you're planning for, right? So those are the release size things. Usually they're features. Okay? To the outputs. The teams are going to gobble up that roadmap and decompose it to a level they feel comfortable with, and they're going to place those stories into their iterations. If you're not doing this story level planning in this event, you're not getting to the right level of granularity, which won't give you the right outputs, right? We're not going to have a plan we can believe in. Now, we're not doing sprint planning to the degree where teams are tasking things out, and committing to sprint level agreements. What they're doing is they're sequencing the work that aligns with the strategic features into a calendar, right? And I say calendar because you may have a Kanban team, you may have even a waterfall team, but if we can all plug into the same cadence, we can start to lay the work out and get a good picture of where those dependencies are, what needs to be sequenced properly, where the risks are, right? And this is a screenshot of Rally of a team doing that. So we actually have teams doing this in Rally in the session. Maybe they've done some of this work in advance. That could be useful too. There's a balance of how much we want to do up front, but knowing more certainly allows us to make better decisions. Additionally, when they're doing this, they're sequencing the work, they're going to be capturing, visualizing, and raising dependencies and risks. And I'm going to borrow a slide from Dean Leffingwell's material for the Scaled Agile Framework material he's created. He has a lot of teams create this version of this he calls it the program board, where you have the teams on the left-hand side, the calendar up on the top, and you're kind of showing where the features lay on the plan and how they're going to be consumed by the teams. You're taking red yarn and you're drawing dependencies and making sure they're sequenced properly, and also identifying key milestones, whether they're deployments, integration events, external events, up at the top, so that we can communicate around those things and take that stuff into consideration. So it is a level of abstraction from the team plan, but it gives you this visibility into the whole system and how the work is going to be consumed. And we've just recently released in June a page that does this in the Rally tool. I mean, we are doing this internally, this process internally, this big room planning, and our engineers have built a tool to help facilitate this. It's fantastic. It's a powerful command center for your quarter, both from a planning and execution perspective. We're seeing the list of features we've committed to on the left-hand side. We're seeing the teams lined up there. You see 10-foot pole, green, and then the calendar across the top. And we're also tracking the progress with those green bars, what the % complete is. So a real great view. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but identifying dependencies and you'll see even some of the concerns show up next to the features when things are improperly sequenced. And last, output is commitment to the plan. So this is the third thing that we're looking for. We want our teams and our stakeholders to buy into what we've agreed to doing, how we spent our time over the past 2 days. And a great Agile facilitation technique to do this is called a fist of 5. So if you've taken Scrum Master training, you might be familiar with this. But if not, we ask team members to throw up some fingers. 3 or more says I can live with the plan or I love the plan, depending on more is better. But anyone that throws up 2 or 1 has a concern they would like to voice or does not feel like the plan is feasible. And we stop and we hear that out and we try to fix that problem. So it gives that opportunity for us to kind of iterate on those issues. So 3 inputs, 3 outputs, don't forget them. There's more than that. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to walk you through the planning flow. So the planning flow is how these 2 days lay out. And this, again, is at a very high level, but to give you a good idea of what happens during 2 days. How could we possibly spend 2 days in a room together with everybody and be productive? Well, I will say something about the 2 days. 2 days is a very small, again, investment when you think about all of the outcomes that come out of this. And it's not 2 days, we create a plan and we're done. It's 2 days, we create a plan and we continually steer around that plan throughout the quarter. This creates the communication channels and allows us to focus on the right, again, risks, dependencies, and work that's most important to the success of our group. So how does this look? Well, first, let's look at day 1, right? So I break this into 4 quarters just to keep it real simple, and that's the level of detail we're going to get to today. But the first half of the first day is important. It's critical to really giving us that information to drive the next day and a half. And what we'll do here is we'll have a set of presentations that set business context. Usually, it's a 10,000-foot view. From some type of executive, senior VP, maybe someone managing that line of business. Again, someone we don't see every day. And then the next presentation will be, maybe the 1,000-foot view from the product managers that delivers the roadmap of features we're trying to accomplish within the next quarter. This has all been vetted with product management. This has been broken down, and it's probably not the first time that the engineering teams have seen this stuff. And then the 100-foot view is getting into details like our architectural approach, the tools we're adopting, the changes we're making as a group, how we're all working together towards the same thing. So that that could be anything from thinking about how we're automating our releases or experimenting with new testing frameworks, things like that. So we even may discuss changes to the ceremony since the last time we did it. So it's an opportunity to really get down to the nitty-gritty. Then we break for lunch, and the next day looks a little like this. We've got team breakouts. So the teams take that roadmap and consume it. So what that means is they'll take those features and those stories that are related to those features, and they'll start to do that action of breaking the stories and putting them into their calendar, onto their sprints, sequencing the work how they see fit. They might spend some time communicating with other teams or asking the stakeholders questions if things aren't clear. And that's one of the benefits of having everyone there. We don't get 1, 2, 3 days of wait time to get those answers. Everyone's there to serve the teams and to help them co-create their plans. We're working towards the end of the day. The teams will do a readout of their plans at the end of day 1 to see how far we got and how feasible it all looks. And we'll talk a little bit about the management review and problem solving in a second. But one of the things we do is we have a cadence of planning, right? A cadence of getting together. The Scrum Masters, the product owners, what have you, will be meeting throughout the day every 45 minutes, every hour, whatever the timing is, and they'll discuss where they are with their plan, some of the risks and dependencies. They'll be visualizing those things, capturing them on the wall or in a tool like Rally, and incrementally working towards those readouts. Now, at the end of the day, after the team breakouts, typically what happens is the management and stakeholders dismiss the teams, right? We've heard the readouts, we've got the plans to some level, some shape, and say maybe, hey guys, great job today. Why don't you go enjoy a happy hour for just an hour, or no, I don't know, whatever length of time it takes, right? But the important thing is the management review and problem solving happens, and they look at the list of risks, they look at the really key dependencies and how they're sequenced, they look at what the teams were able to pull in and push out. There's going to be some things that they're just not going to have capacity to do, and are those things more important than the things we did plan, right? So they come up, they analyze kind of what happened to prepare for the next day. And the next day, we start that day with adjustments, risks, and dependencies. So recommendations based off of what we learned from the first day and what we think is possible for the next day. So this is a key piece. This is why the event spans 2 days, because we want to iterate on it right there and make changes. I've been involved in a lot of these planning meetings, both from a facilitator and a stakeholder perspective. And you know, one of the things that's always interesting, there's always something that pops up. Like for one quarter I saw we had a list of 100 defects, and we were trying to knock off maybe 20 of them or something, kind of burn that defect backlog down. And nobody planned any defects on day one. They focused all on features. So the feature stuff looked good, but then there was this other elephant in the room, which was like, hey, how do we get some of these defects done? So what they did is they made the recommendation that each team tries to fit 2 in, because usually the teams aren't planning to 100% capacity for 5 iterations out, right? There's always a little slack there. So by slating things around, moving things in, each team was able to pull 2, 3, 4 defects and start to burn down some of that stuff. Another example would be, hey, we got to a point where I thought I was going to get feature A and feature B, and you did your planning and you were only able to fit feature A in. Well, feature B is actually what's really important. Is there any solution we can come up with to get feature B in there and maybe push feature A out a little bit, right? So it was a prioritization thing. But that feedback, once we saw the reality, allowed us to provide a strong recommendation, and the teams did some replanning on day 2. So that allows us to come up with the best plan, with the best information, which is the information we have now, today, right, in the planning session. So after that's done, we do another readout from the teams, and then we work towards a shared commitment. And this isn't super simple. I mean, yes, we do the fist of 5. That's the easy part. But before we get there, we need to address those risks that are up hanging on the wall. So typically that may have been handled, in the management review and problem-solving session. Maybe some more showed up. But we're going to walk through every one of those and roam them, which means resolve, own, accept, or mitigate. So another hat tip to Dean Leffingwell on that acronym, but it's a great way to think about structuring. Well, are we going to, is this not a risk anymore, or is there someone going to take it and champion that risk, or do we just need to deal with it and try to mitigate it the best we can, but we can't really avoid it, right? Maybe it's an external dependency. So hearing all of those things kind of closes the loop on the meeting and works towards that commitment vote. And if we don't get everyone a 3 or higher on that fist of 5, we'll do rework, sometimes with a subset of the teams that are the bottlenecks, right? And then we'll close the session with a nice passive retrospective, right, and get some feedback so we can always improve the session. So that's it. That's the flow. And as I said before, this is an investment. And while it may seem overwhelming, all these things I'm throwing at you, if you're thinking about heading down this path, I'm going to urge you to consider ensuring this investment. You really only get one shot to do this. If it's a colossal failure, you're never going to get that political support to pull everyone together again. But I could tell you that when our coaches who are all around the world do this, I can't think of any of these sessions we've hosted where someone said we should stop doing this. This wasn't valuable. They're all learning sessions. They're all a starting point, and we can always get better. But our experienced coaches and transformation consultants lead organizations to actually executing this event with success. And why do I feel confident about that? It's because no other company does this every week. We do. Okay? So we spend time with a customer, an existing customer or prospect, helping lead them through this. Because we have all of the battle wounds and all of the all of that field experience to help mitigate and avoid those potholes. So let me share a couple tips on how we can help. So first of all, if you can imagine pulling approximately 100 people together in a room, the facilitation aspects of this can be overwhelming to the common man or woman. But luckily, we are experts in facilitation, and we can provide that support and guidance so that we can leave your organization with the skills to manage this on your own. Examples of that facilitation would include everything from creating a detailed agenda that would be shared with every team at every table, right? And even giving some of the folks that are leading the session from your organization a script to read. We actually write a custom script. Think about it. You're in a room with 100 people. Some big issue is blowing up. People are getting hot under the collar and emotional, and you're trying to help them, or you're trying to connect the right people to have the right conversations and make the right decisions. At the same time, you've got 97 other people in the room that are heads down doing their plan. We get to a point where we need to huddle, where we need to continue to move on. You need to turn around and say whatever you got to say, right? We got to continue to, this is what we're doing, read through that script. Having a script there is a great accomplice in terms of making this successful and keeping everyone on track. So, I mean, that's one of the things we do. The other thing that I love to talk about is this, I'm full of metaphors today, is the wedding planning aspect of this. Actually getting people into the room, organizing the room so that we can, maximize the communication. And, everyone's got the crazy aunt and the crazy uncle that can't sit at the same table together, right? So maybe we need to kind of separate the right people. Maybe we need to put the stakeholders in this middle table so they can be tapped for information and questions. So thinking about the physical logistics of the space, the amount of Wi-Fi bandwidth we may need based off the people, whether it's on-site or off-site, what are cost-effective ways to save, what are the right corners to cut. Those are the things that we can help, structure. And lastly, it's not all about the event, right? The release planning kicks off a quarter's worth of work, and there are all these opportunities for feedback, steering, grooming, working on what's coming next in the next quarter. Those are things that you're going to need help with, or you're going to just kick off a really great first quarter, and quarter two is going to fall flat. So there's this aspect of keeping this ship moving in the right direction, as well as coming back and retroing and closing out the quarter. So a lot of people say, well, all right, Andy, you sold me, and I'm sure that's where you're at right now. I'm sure you're saying, where do I sign, right? How do we get started? I want to start next quarter, which is in 2 weeks. Well, I have never seen an organization move this direction in less than a month. We need at least a month to prepare, and I actually think that's modest. But we do have a bunch of very talented coaches that have strong opinions about everything, and amazingly enough, we've come up with a framework that all of our coaches work from, and it's called Ready, Sync, Go. And at a high level, it's a 3-phase approach where the beginning of the go phase is the start of your first quarter. So the ready and the syncing get you ready for this huge big room planning event that's going to drive all this value. So let me walk you through what this is real quick, and then we'll be done and we can do some Q&A. The ready phase is the shortest of the 3 phases. And in this phase, we're forming a small team of change agents to help educate leadership and maybe even extend beyond leadership, folks that need to get on board to help us make this happen. Talk about, Agile, the benefits of Agile, the benefits of scaling Agile and moving this direction, right? So we work on setting that baseline of where we're going to go. At the same time, we need to learn about your organization. So that means potentially interviewing folks on the ground and talking to leadership and finding what our strengths and our weaknesses are. And also validating that where we're starting, the people, the group we're starting with are the right people. So there's a design aspect to it, right? That value stream I was talking about. Do we have the right people in the room? Who else do we need to pull in? Maybe we need to reorganize ourselves around value as opposed to skill sets and things like that. And not to say we're going to tackle all these problems. We're going to certainly surface a lot of them so we can make a plan and co-create a plan with you. So, that co-creation of the plan is the most important part. We learn a little bit, and then we create a plan with you to fit the needs of your organization, because everyone's different. again, if you're a Rally customer, we're actually doing this planning in Rally, and we're also looking at how you've used Rally in the past or how Rally will be rolled out at the same time to maximize, all of the feedback that we can get from our tool. So we're setting that, we're co-creating the plan. Then we go to execute the plan, and that's the sync phase. And usually it begins with really baselining all the teams and people, the delivery group, within that value stream I've identified, and then working with each team individually. So this is a longer phase. This isn't a few weeks like we did for the planning. And when I say a few weeks, I mean a few visits. So maybe it's like 6 days with a transformation consultant. The sync phase turns into a more hands-on, teams learning Agile, doing their work in an Agile way. If you have Agile teams already, then we may only need to spend a minimal amount of time with them just to kind of tune them. We do a little retrospective and understand, what their strengths are and their weaknesses are and what our consolidated practices are as an organization. So really spend some time getting teams practicing Agile. And then also working with stakeholders, business stakeholders and product folks to build the right backlog to bring to the teams in quarterly planning, as well as develop a tangible roadmap. So this is a page out of Rally, and a lot of people have something like this, but this is that roadmap, and this is the detail that I'm talking about. It's a list of features, things we think we can accomplish within the span of a quarter, right? Prioritized. You're seeing different colors on those features. Maybe they're coming from different projects or different products. And you're seeing teams with an estimated capacity, and we stacked that supply and demand against one another, and we're queuing up the work that we're going to be bringing to the teams. So, you could do this in PowerPoint. We used to until we built a tool for it. You can do it in Excel. But this is if you don't have something like this, then you don't have the right amount of detail to bring to the teams. The next phase would be the go phase. So again, I mentioned the go phase starts with that big room planning event, that quarterly planning event, where we pull everyone together for a couple days. And we consume that roadmap and break it into the small things. And we'll help facilitate that the first time you do it. And we'll be moving towards passing that facilitation off to your lead facilitators, Agile coaches, what have you. So that's the beginning of the quarter, but there's a whole bunch of other things that need to happen throughout the quarter to properly steer and to continue to create flow of work to the team so we can do the next one next quarter. As well as we help provide that support throughout the quarter and then come back, inspect and adapt, and then to a lesser degree help you kick off your next quarterly planning. So I'll show you a couple more things here. That release tracking page that I showed earlier becomes super critical because as an output of big room planning, we're going to see a plan that looks like this. What are my teams working on, right? Which features are sequenced when? Where are the dependencies? How does that plan progress throughout the quarter? Where are we with that? Okay, so we've got the list of features on the left-hand side, and we've got all of the the dynamic planning that's happened, and we're actually showing progress. We're midway through. So the other thing is we want to create flow in our planning process. So we want to do that without disrupting the teams with too much planning, right? We don't want to overplan. We don't want to take them away from executing their work. So this is actually from our release train engineer here at Rally shared this with me, and it's a calendar of things and dates where we can see we can queue the right work up and be on track so that we're not stopping to plan, right? That happens sometimes when we're like, okay, we finished the quarter, now we need 2 weeks to get ready for the next quarter, and that doesn't work, right? So how do we create that flow and spread all those events across the quarter? And you'll notice down here on May 25th, which happens to be my birthday, if anyone wants to remember that, that's when we bring the teams in and get them involved. So halfway through is the first time the teams really see the features, and that's important. They maybe provide some perspective based off the work they're doing now and rough sizing, but we don't want them to get too crazy. So again, your calendar is going to look different, but this is an example of how we interact and how we guide you and set you up for success. So a rough timeline here for how to do this. You can see it's a little longer than a month. We spend 1 to 4 weeks getting ready, right? Creating that plan, syncing, getting the teams on board, giving them a vision of where we're going to go, and then we're going to kick off that big event. Okay? The 12 weeks is just a representation of the length of the quarter. That's okay. And I just want to remind you that this is an invitation for a conversation. This looks different no matter where you are, and that's how we work with organizations to roll this out and to make you successful. Here's just a little logo shot here showing you some of the organizations we have worked with in the past and are continuing to work with, helping them scale agility and do things like this. My advice to you, as you're listening to this today, is that remember, there's a cost to waiting. Right? It's that run rate we're burning up with those 7 problems. And we can meet about meetings and continue to meet and try to improve things incrementally, linearly, or we can pull everyone together 4 times a year to create alignment and to create a structure for feedback and steering. So have a bias towards action, right? Think about that person at your organization that you need to tell about this. Feel free to reach out to us. We can help explain this. We can help sell it. But again, this is the thing. I mean, if there ever was a silver bullet to scaling agility, this is the starting point. As some of our coaches say, this is the tip of the spear. This is where you start surfacing all those problems and start tackling them off. So we're building the right things and cutting down a lot of that waste. Cool. So I think we got some time for some questions. Jenny?
Yep. Thanks, Andy. Somehow it makes perfect sense that you are a Gemini, so thank you for sharing that with us. We got some terrific questions in, and the first one taps into something you mentioned early in the webinar. You advised people to think about their value stream and organize around value, and we had a great question, which is how do you identify value? So if you have a product owner who identifies what's valuable in one way and someone from the business side of the house who thinks that something else is valuable, how do you meet in the middle? Are there consistent characteristics for defining value?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to take the right size lens when you're thinking about a value stream, because you're kind of looking for that sweet spot, right, of teams and people that flow value to market, right? And I know that's pretty ambiguous still, but sometimes you can look at your organization and say, what are the products we have, right? Or the product lines we have, or who are we serving? What market? Maybe your market defines the value, right? Or your users. So I think starting to answer some of those questions will set you on the right path. I mean, I completely agree with the question. I think a lot of people can argue about value or see it differently. But remember, we're looking for that sweet spot of really amplifying Agile benefits, and the typical Agile team is 7 plus or minus 2 people. So when you think about pulling together a delivery group, typically the sweet spot for that size is 7 plus or minus 2 teams. So roughly 100 people once you start including stakeholders and 7 or 8 or 9 teams, 9 Agile teams. So that's how I think you'll be able to optimize, and over time that value stream may change. That's another thing to think about. It's not set in stone. We want to keep the value stream relatively persistent so they get good. But I mean, there may be business decisions or investment allocations that make us make different organizational shifts. So hopefully that helps.
It does. Thanks. We have another question here about committing to a plan. Can you think of an example of when, during big room planning, the group could not commit to a plan and some rework is required? I can think of one from our experience here at Rally where we had too much work in progress. Are there any others that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is you don't want to be passive about that. The commitment is when you give team members that ability to voice their opinion, you really want to make sure that it's real, right? And we're just not mailing it in. So another good way to work towards that commitment is through the two days, continually poll teams individually for their take on how committed they are. So if you do a readout or a mini readout of where we are, I've seen Scrum Masters or product owners or whatever stand up and say, our team's currently at a 2 to 3. We got some 2s and 3s. We got to work this stuff out, right? So the components of the larger system, the smaller teams are kind of they're working towards commitment from their perspective. Now, examples of organizations pushing back, I mean, yeah, I can go back to one of my early days here where I used to do a lot of delivery for Rally, and we sat looking at the Rally team status page, which shows each individual on a Scrum team, and it shows the percentage of allocation they've signed up for. So you would say, I've got roughly 60 hours of time to code, right, this sprint. And then you would pull your tasks in, and it would show you how much capacity you'd have, what your load was on an individual basis. And it's a good thing that when you're doing sprint planning to think about, not just your individual load, but the whole team. So the whole team reviewed this right before they were working towards their sprint commitment. And there was this guy named Carl. And everyone looked at the thing, and it was all green. Everyone was in the green, under 100%, and Carl was at 275% of his personal capacity, clearly a bottleneck. And I was pointing out the obvious, but I said, hey, well, what do we think about this? As a team, what do we feel like our likelihood of success is? And everyone threw a 2 or 1 except Carl, right? And basically called him out on overcommitting. And, the reality was there was a lot of slush in his estimates, and he had an explanation for it, and we managed to move some tasks around to mitigate that problem. But the point was the team called him out, right? It wasn't just an individual saying yes and no. It becomes a collaborative decision, and that's when it becomes real.
Right. Well, and to that point, in your experience, how often do you see teams having to get back together and replan after doing big group planning?
A lot of times, as you kind of roll through big room planning, quarter after quarter, teams come more prepared, and there are less surprises, and you're working on some of the harder problems to solve, right? But I've never really been in a big room planning session. That's not true. I think I have one customer that's done it 12 times, right? So that's over the course of a few years now, and but usually it's not the whole organization that has to sit back. If there's a real tough problem, a couple teams will sit back and they'll work out those issues until they get to a place where they feel good enough to move on. It's not that we're going to solve every problem right then and there, but at least come up with a plan to mitigate and to communicate around the issues so that we can be realistic and steer properly.
You mentioned earlier that it's ideal to have everyone in the room together.
Mm-hmm.
But what would it look like if you had to include some distributed teams in big room planning? Are there recommendations you would make for how to do that?
Yeah, certainly, and that's the reality, right? I mean, it's nice when we're all co-located and can pull together, but even Rally as an organization can't afford to fly everybody in every quarter. Now, my advice would be to go as big as you can the first time, to get everyone to feel it, right, and to understand, because it does create clarity in terms of our purpose, when we all understand and get aligned around what we're trying to accomplish. But, in some distributed environments where you have maybe a large majority of engineers in India and then folks here in the States, it's just not economically feasible to pull everyone together. So some representation either over there or here for that first event will help be a conduit, and any way we can overlap the events based off of time zones is also helpful. But my last piece of advice is technology. So do the video, invest in some type of video presence so we can communicate face to face if we've got questions. Rally has a great collaboration tool called FlowDoc that's part of all of your unlimited edition subscriptions. So if you're an unlimited edition customer, you can spin this thing up and try it out in a meeting where we can all have persistent chat and pull people into conversations proactively. So there's lots of different ways that we can bridge those gaps. So those are the things we need to get creative on and work with the transformation consultant on how to approach those.
Great. So let's say that this sounds really great to a lot of folks listening, but they work in an organization that is mostly waterfall, and they want to start the conversation with the decision makers in their organization about scaling Agile, and they're anticipating some resistance. How do you start that conversation?
You need some type of buy-in, right, from a leadership perspective to make this happen. Rarely is a grassroots Agile adoption going to scale properly. It doesn't mean everyone needs to be Agile. I've seen a lot of organizations do this, and I would say one organization that did it at a large scale, and 75% of the people in the room were not Agile yet. Some were saying we'll never be Agile. We don't want to be Agile, right? But the event itself created enough purpose to start working in a more Agile way together. But that event had a ton of executive support. There was a larger business reason as to why we were moving this direction. It wasn't just to be Agile and to be responsive. It was to solve a business problem or a business need. And that's what you need to look for. That's the why. That's the why we do this. We're not doing this because we just want you to be Agile. We want you to drive more value to your customers. Beat your competitors in the market. So there may be that's an opportunity. That's something you want to look for. Is there a project, a program, a product line that cannot fail, right? That is struggling, and we have an opportunity to try this. That's a great. That's a great opportunity. That's a great instance by which we'd want to focus on potentially.
Maybe have people do that back of the napkin calculator for themselves. Great. Okay, we're going to do a couple more questions here. We've just got time for a few more. So here's a question about how teams handle non-functional requirements, application standards, best practices, development standards. How do you bring that into the room for big room planning? Is that something that needs to be discussed? How do you address that?
Right. So I mentioned earlier setting the context, and actually this is where I really do like the Scaled Agile framework for setting a vision. There are roles that support the team that are shared by the team. For instance, the systems architects, the systems team that does some of the testing and integration, maybe an architecture team that supports the infrastructure or the ops team, right? Those people need to be included. They are part of the value stream, and it doesn't all happen in the big room planning. It's not the first time we hear it, but you certainly want to touch base on that. And the third part of setting context, we talked about that a little bit, right? The architect or some of these folks that share that vision for what we're going to do and how we're going to align ourselves need to introduce that and need to make sure that that's factored into the individual team's plans. Or, we're going to have chaotic, scattershot deployment of our technology solutions, right? So, again, Dean Leffingwell in the Scaled Agile framework talks about having an architectural runway, which is really just taking a slice of your investment, your pie, and saying we are going to dedicate a certain percentage to that type of work, and not necessarily build features. That's important, right? When you're thinking about being deliberate with your investments, you need to also include those things that are going to keep the ship afloat and allow us to deliver faster. But you also don't want to stop everything to do that, right? You still need to continue to deliver value. So it looks like we're running out of time. And also, we have a bunch of follow-up information, the Rally Software Twitter handle, the Andy Carlson Twitter handle. So if you want to chirp at me on Twitter or look at the beer I've been drinking or the music I've been listening to or the Agile stuff I'm talking about, feel free to follow me there. And, of course, you know where to find us. We would love to continue this conversation with you and your organization.
Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll be following up with you shortly.